Voice of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about Revelations 2:9. I'll read it. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. End of the verse. Listen as we reveal the allness of the divine principle as the only reality while revealing the folly of the mental material world of energy. In this show, we will expose the benefits of knowing the truth, which liberates from the false beliefs. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be divine. So the title of today's show is Unmasking the Synagogue of Satan. Can you tell us what inspired this particular topic for today's podcast?
Yeah, the inspiration came from Revelation, the synagogue of Satan, which we translate to mean the consciousness of this world, a consciousness monopolized by duality and a belief in two powers, which violates the divine law of eternal life. As I advance in spiritual science, I can see the wisdom and the error much clearer. Collectively, we have things backwards, as a result, unable to reveal the truth. Spirit is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. Mental material is illusion. As John told us in 1:3-5, and I'll read it, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. End of quote. Of course, we can uphold the orthodox religious belief God made everything good and bad, but this halfway position eliminates the divine principle and perpetuates the mental material illusion. So here we want to start to move forward, learn how to demonstrate divine law with scientific certainty, and then understand all of the things we have to do, our responsibility, in order to induce this God experience.
So what do you think was really meant by the phrase synagogue of Satan in the Bible? Can you maybe break that down for us?
Well, I definitely think we miss the message of the Bible because we don't go far enough with it. Sin means missing the mark. In Kriya Yoga, we call it avidya, ignorance, which is mistaking the impermanent for the permanent. We think this world and this human experience is real. As a result, we're trying to make sense out of what isn't even here. And we've taken healing off the table. We're no longer demonstrating our conscious awareness of the divine omnipresence, and we're accepting this temporary sense of life as the truth. And of course, when we do that, we don't have the principle, we don't have the mental faculty that enables us to perceive the divine creation, and we're going solely on the evidence of the testimony of the five corporeal senses, without the benefit of knowing the divine creation. And of course, we don't have the methodology. We're not developing the faculty that enables us to perceive the invisible, intangible divine omnipresence.
It's interesting. I think we have to have this realization. Our perception of the word Satan, even Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." He's talking about us to stop sinning. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, again, sin meaning missing the mark. Satan also is another way of referring to Saturn. In Kriya Yoga, we use what's called the principle of manifestation, how things come into form. And in mythology, they have these stories they use to help us understand things that are not visible and tangible to the mind that can't understand the absolute. So we have symbolic languages. It's very difficult to understand the infinite, infinite terms. But Saturn, if you notice the path of descending prana, which is the principle of manifestation, how things come into form, it begins at the feminine terminal of the third eye center and then moves downward through the feminine terminal of the lower 6 energy centers. And at Saturn chakra is where it starts to cross over and then start the ascension. But the moon and Saturn have always been the symbols for manifestation. And manifestation is how things come into form. And what we know is they don't come in whole. They come in half. Duality. Because things aren't whole, we can perceive them. There's a point of departure, contrast, that enables material sense to perceive what's before it. But the key here is not to fall for the things that are in half, but to be a faithful witness to that which is changeless, perfect, and whole, the divine creation. But of course, we've lost touch with this wisdom. And so now we accept what's in half, and we're trying to make sense out of what can never be made whole. And yet there is this innate drive in all of us. We want to be whole. We want to return to this unified state. And then because we are neglecting this latent potential, we're experiencing this kickback that comes from this innate drive that we want to be whole and we want to be complete. And our inner environment is inundated with these symptoms: guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, boredom. These are the things we're struggling with collectively, but we don't have the methodology any longer to initiate the process to become a whole person. So we try and mask it. Things like therapy, and we have drugs we use to try and anesthetize what's going on, but we're not growing psychologically and spiritually anymore.
We have a passage here from Herb Fitch's Revelation of St. John, Class 4A, and I'll read it. And the recognition of it would go something like this: there is a dog, there is a person, there is a tree, there is an enemy, and this is what the 5 senses are telling us about our outer environment. But if this becomes meaningful to you in your consciousness, where the dog, tree, person, enemy appear to be, you are accepting the presence of infinite divine individuality, and you are making a habit of doing that consistently. You may not know what it will do for you, but you'll find out quickly enough, because the moment you know that the dog isn't there, only infinite individual spirit is there, there is a new force within you that goes to work. The Christ within takes over the jurisdiction of your relationship with that dog. The Christ within takes over the jurisdiction of your relationship with any person or condition that you recognize as invisible spirit, there expressing but veiled by false human sense perception. End of the quote. So, Swami, it sounds to me like he's telling us once we stop sinning, this is what happens. We have this relationship with the divine.
Yeah, and I really like what he said here. There is a new force within you that goes to work. When our thought begins to shift from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis, there are changes that take place. This idea of born again of spirit, where we're no longer drawing from fear and limitation, and we are now acknowledging truth and wholeness. Consciousness is experience. The other thing, acknowledgement of the Christ within. Get away from the belief Jesus equals Christ. Jesus was the manifestation of the Christ, but Christ is an eternal principle, the Messiah, what makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. So, what are the things we can do to induce this birth of Christ in consciousness? And these are the strategies, once you employ, then you can start to see there is a new force within you that does go to work. As Jesus said, it is the Father within that does the work. But it's not through human effort, not trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, or even asking. It is resting in the knowledge, no longer thinking, forming thoughts and opinions based on information coming through the corporeal senses, but our mind is now a field of awareness for the invisible, intangible, divine creation, which is everywhere always functioning. It is when the Lord builds the house, when we are letting divine mind express itself through us in our consciousness to experience these changes.
So, I'd like to dig a little deeper with this concept of sin. And I immediately thought about the adulteress story in the Bible. And Jesus says to all the people with stones, those who have never sinned may cast the first stone. And then one by one, they all drop the stone. So let's talk about our concept of sinning versus divine concept of sinning.
Yeah, see, we're confused with this good and bad behavior. That's all part of the mental material concept, duality, the belief in two powers. In order to have the principle, you have to understand one power, only one eternal life, and it's perfect, whole, complete. Separating the wheat from the tares is not the same when you do it good from bad, because you're still in duality, under the law of karma. This is the sin. We think we're a good human being and God is rewarding us. So finite good becomes a bigger barrier than finite bad. But as Mary Baker Eddy said about the created world, sometimes beautiful, always erroneous. We never want to mistake the impermanent for the permanent. Understand, spirit is perfect, whole, changeless. It's everywhere, always. Once you start to develop a better understanding of the truth of being, and you no longer fall for the good and bad concept about it, keep your mind in constant relation with this invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence until you have this birth of Christ in consciousness. And again, some of the things we need to do in order to induce this, recognize you don't just sit around and wait for God to take you in on God's demonstration. We have to graduate from thinking with 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses. The middle phase in this developmental process is develop human intelligence, develop human willpower, master ability to control how we think before we can stop thinking and make the mind an avenue of awareness for the divine creation. You can be that place where divine will is now functioning in your awareness. We're not making anything happen, but we're educating ourselves in how to get out of the way so we can let the Lord build the house.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. We have a soundbite from Herb Fitch. Again, it's from his Revelation of St. John, Class 4A.
Yeah, and if anybody is interested in the full audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
Looking through the finite physical eye, the finite physical ear, the finite physical sense of touch, we have become aware only of our finite level of perception, instead of becoming aware of the infinite Father's reality. But remove the five senses and let that Christ sense, the single eye, become your five senses, and you are aware of the infinity. And then you are not aware of mortality, or of death, or of birth, or of defect, or of any form of imperfection. All these negative things are only in the eyes of the finite beholder, and we are told that we can come out of the finite beholding into the infinite beholding through the Christ mind, which is the single eye. The great and beautiful revelation of man's great error is this. This is John 5, verse 2. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. And in these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. I want you to take those 2 words, 5 porches, and change them to 5 senses. Read it again. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 senses. And in these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. Where did these blind, impotent, halt, withered folk lay? In the 5 senses. They were waiting for someone to move the water out there. Isn't that what man does? He's blind within the 5 senses. He's lame within the 5 senses. He has problems within the 5 senses, and he's waiting for something out there to come and deliver him. The moving of the water out there. Did Jesus take this man into the water? No. He said, rise. He didn't mean get up. He meant rise above your 5 senses, and you'll find you're perfect as your Father which is in heaven. The minute the veil of the senses is removed, you see that you can pick up your bed and walk. You never was sick in the first place. Separated from your reality, the Christ, by the veil of the senses, we walk in a sense of mortality, though we are now immortal beings. Mankind walks within the 5 porches. You build a porch to shield yourself from the sun, so you get shade. The 5 porches and the 5 senses are the same. They're identical. That's the meaning. That's the hidden meaning of the 5 porches. The 5 senses act like porches. They cover the light and leave us in the shade, so that the eye does not see the fullness of what is there. The ear does not hear the fullness of what is there. The five senses do not know the fullness of what is there, and in that limited sense of things we walk and call ourselves mortal beings. We do not have to wait for something out there to come and free us. We have to accept Christ within, who is already the established fact of being, which has overcome the five senses, and Christ within leads us out of the Egypt of these five senses. Now that's what the letter to Smyrna is telling us, that five senses have made us think we were physical mortal beings, but the angel of God in the midst of us is our true identity, and it is immortal now. It is spirit now. It is not divided from God. It is the individualization of God now. But we must read, hear, and keep. We must practice that knowledge of our identity in such a way that nothing in this world can tempt us to believe that we are less than the Father says we are. This is how we will overcome the five porches, the five senses.
I really like how Herb Fitch is telling us in the very beginning, aware of the infinite. That to me is like giving us the big clue about how to stop sinning, and that is by understanding how important it is to realize what the five senses are doing to us. Swami, your thoughts on that?
Well, I also think it's very important not to consider the testimony of the material senses as the enemy. The enemy is our belief this is the last stop. This is where we get off. It's believing the testimony of the senses. We still need the mortal mind to graduate from thinking with five corporeal senses to knowing with seven spiritual senses. Graduate from thinking to knowing, not just getting rid of the five corporeal senses. The idea here is to graduate from thinking to knowing, from sense to soul. We have to cultivate the faculty that gets us beyond the limited perspective. I look at it as the monitor on the computer. Without a monitor, there really isn't much you can do with a computer. It's an incredible instrument, but it needs the monitor. And the same thing with this mind-body spiritual complex. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to use the mental material concept, the belief, in order to graduate to faith and then eventually understanding. I think this idea of no self has become a big barrier in what I call celebrity pseudo-spiritual community. It's not no self, it's one self, and it is the only self. Otherwise, we don't go far enough to understand how everything is working. The purpose of this incarnation is to glorify the Creator. We want to be that place where the divine creation can express itself through us.
We have a passage here from Mary Baker Eddy, her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 205, lines 7 to 21. And this may help us understand how the unmask error. And I'll read it. When will the error of believing that there is life in matter and that sin, sickness, and death are creations of God be unmasked? When will it be understood that matter has neither intelligence, life, nor sensation, and that the opposite belief is the prolific source of all suffering? God created all through mind and made all perfect and eternal. Where then is the necessity for recreation or procreation? Befogged in error, the error of believing that matter can be intelligent for good or evil, we can catch clear glimpses of God only as the mists disperse, or as they melt into such thinness that we perceive the divine image in some word or deed which indicates the true idea, the supremacy and reality of good, the nothingness and unreality of evil. End of the quote. Swami, what are your thoughts?
The idea of turning or thinking differently becomes a strategy to be employed and practiced in order to demonstrate the divine principle. It becomes apparent why no one is demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty today, because We don't have the principle and the rule required. We're doing it backwards. This is the insanity of humanity, doing the same thing, expecting a different return. We're trying to bring forth the divine image with the mind that is creating the false sense of existence. Once we accept this mental material world of energy isn't real, challenge the collective consensus, theories, concepts, and beliefs that are saying matter is real. And this was what Mary Baker Eddy built her entire movement on. You have to understand this. And once you do, as Herb Fitch told us, there is a new force within you that goes to work.
Well, it's really interesting. In preparation for the podcast today, we Googled, how does Mary Baker Eddy unmask error? And this is what we received back. Mary Baker Eddy suggested unmasking error through a process of spiritual discernment and recognizing the truth of God's perfect creation. This involves understanding that error is not a real substantial entity, but rather a mental illusion arising from a mistaken view of reality. By understanding this, individuals can begin to reject error and recognize the divine truth. End of the answer for us. Swami, any insights from you on this?
If you understand Buddhism, that's exactly what Buddhism says. What we're calling life is Maya, it's illusion. The Bible tells us, ye are dead and your life is hid with Christ in God. This isn't new information, it's just foreign to these modern times. Our thinking has become so clouded with our Western scientific and medical beliefs. We no longer seem to have the capacity to trust anything that isn't tangible and visible to our corporeal senses. And as a result, we're completely removed from the only self-existent power in this universe.
Swami, any recommendations you can give us that could help us with our topic today?
Well, one of the things we could start is working with some of the words and how they must be understood. Words like repent, which doesn't mean plead for forgiveness. It means think differently. Born again of spirit is really a request here that moves us beyond born of woman, born of man, born of spirit. There's a process in development. Caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. Also, rise. Like Herb said, rising above the five corporeal senses. Or even what Mary Baker Eddy said, follow me only as I follow Christ. She's not talking about human behavior here. She's talking about embodying the eternal principle, the life of God within. We don't just follow the rules, the concepts, and the theories, like in Revelations where it says, read, hear, keep. We follow Jesus in someone else. Christ must go away as someone to follow and then reappear as the life of one's own self. And of course, there's an evidence procedure that accompanies this change as thought shifts from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis. And we want to start to recognize when we are doing this correctly and when we are doing the same thing, expecting a different return.
So I thank you for your insights for today's episode, Unmasking the Synagogue of Satan. Listeners, be sure to visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you could press that would further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's episode?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and be divine. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.